It is my honor and my privilege to welcome and introduce my dear friend, Irit Schaefer, here to the Simsbury Free Library. Irit is the author of Good Blood, A Journey to Healing. And in her memoir, Irit shares of hers and her family's stories of love, forgiveness, resilience, and faith. And her book, Good Blood, is the winner of the Nabi Pinnacle Book Achievement Award in the fall of 2024. Through Irit's wisdom and her humor, which I love because she really interjects her humor in all of her stories, she shares about the powerful mind-body connection and the resilience that we can all tap into for our own individual healing and well-being. So I'd like to introduce here Irit Schaefer.
Hello, it's so nice to be here, and I'm so honored to share a story of healing and life and love that's so important to me. So I grew up in Montreal. Both my parents survived the Holocaust. And my dad, though, he was different than my mom. My mom had major PTSD, so you couldn't ask any questions, or it was too stressful for her, and she could faint. My dad, on the other hand, shared stories with me like they were superhero stories. So he was like Clark Kent during the day and Superman at night when he shared stories with me. So I'd be cuddled in his big bed and ask him over and over, can you tell me that story again and again? But he shared stories that a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, and so on could understand as a superhero story. So I got my undergrad degree at McGill University in education, and I was a high school physical education teacher and coach for 8 years before I had a calling to go back to school. And I went to USC for my degree in physical therapy. And now I have a practice of energy work, physical therapy, intuitive work, etc. But the title of the book, Good Blood, A Journey of Healing, the name of the book, Good Blood, came about from one of my dad's stories. And we all have stories that happen to us, stories that impact us in a positive way, and negative stories that will eventually impact us in a positive way. And they're both equally powerful. So my dad would share a story of how he was in the forced Hungarian labor camp. And the only way to survive the labor camp was to escape. And otherwise you were killed. And it was actually another Hungarian officer who warned my dad that he needed to escape because there was a Hungarian officer, soldier, whatever you wanted to call them, and they were with the Nazis. And he was out to make sure that he would not be alive in the morning. So my dad, with a few people, because the Russians were, in the woods with them, and he had this white flag saying that he was Jewish, but it didn't really matter because the Russians didn't really like any of them. And he was with 3 other people, and he was welcomed with machine gun fire. And the other 3 left because they said he died. And he did die. But he came back, and I'll share that story in a little bit. But the story he shared with me of how he had the bullets taken out without medicine, and he didn't scream. And I was so amazed by that. It was like a superhero story. And I'd ask him, how is that possible? And he'd say he had good blood. And I said, do I? And he'd laugh. And I said, okay, I'm going to be tough like my dad. And when I had a splinter, I would be tough like my dad, and I cried. I had an ankle that got sprained, and I'd be tough like my dad, and I cried. But I was so curious about the healing powers within us, and how do we heal? And I would ask question after question, and he would share the stories that he could share. But when I was in physical therapy school, I was in a serious car accident. It was on the freeway. I was stopped, and in LA, traffic's always stopped. And cars started to move far away, and the truck behind me just pummeled into me, looking ahead and not paying attention. And he got out of the car, and started yelling at me, saying it's not a big deal. Well, I ended up in the hospital, and he took off. So it was trauma just with all that happening. And I ended up in the hospital because I had pain. It's like a dentist hitting, with a drill, hitting your nerve for hours on end, and a headache that was way worse than any migraine I had. And when I left the hospital, they said, well, you'll just have to live with it. But what's causing it, we don't know, but you'll just have to live with it. The physical therapist went, the teachers there, and it's one of the best schools in the country, they went, we don't want to give you false hope. And I go, but if you don't know what's wrong with me, how can you tell me that? And one day at 4:30 in the afternoon, I'm in bed in PT school, and I hear a voice. And the voices I heard before that were, you're not good enough, you're this, you're that. But this voice said, if your dad could heal from 6 bullets and a gangrene arm, you can heal from this accident. And you're going to write a book because the world has to know healing is possible. And you're going to tell the world because that needs to be told. And so for the first time, I'd had hope again. And hope is so important because without it, we give up. And it's not our path to give up. And so I called my dad. It's the first time I got excited. And I said, Dad, I just got that. I'm supposed to write a book about healing because if you could heal, so could I. And he said to me, doctors don't know what they don't know. And, you know, he had a broken rib and they thought it was lung cancer. And he said it's from the war where he broke his rib. And then it was from the war where he broke his rib. And he said, so many stories like that, but you will heal. And he said, you will write a book and you will also talk about yourself. And in that moment, I could feel his knowing. I breathed in his knowing. And I knew I was going to write a book and no one was going to stop me. And I ended up getting it traditionally published by MSI Press, which was a miracle in itself. And I also knew I would heal. And it changed the whole energy system in my body because I now knew I was going to heal. I had no idea how. And it's so important. One of the pieces of good blood is if we don't have a belief, we want to be with people who do so we can infuse that, because when we give up, we're not in our truth. We're in our fear, and our fear's ruling us. And that never gives us good results because like everyone else, when I'm in fear, I do things that are just they're not very smart. And I want to share a little bit about my dad, and then I'll get back to other stories. So my dad shared about his story, and he would share some other stories. And then I went to Europe when I started 30 years later, after I heard the voice and after my dad spoke to me, is when I started writing the book. And I always knew I was going to, but it took that. And I went to Europe again, and I met my relatives for the first time. The ones that my dad talked to me about since I was a little kid. And his favorite person on the planet was my great aunt Ellie, his aunt. And Ellie was the closest person to an angel I ever met. And I will talk more about her after. And I met her at 88, and because I speak Hungarian, I was able to communicate with her. And she shared a story about my dad that I had no idea about. And I'll read it. It's part of my book. And so when he was a Russian POW till 1948, they wouldn't let him out. He figured out a way to escape. And when he came home to Košice, everybody saw a ghost because they had heard he had passed. And so he came home, and I asked my Aunt Ellie, what was it like when you saw my dad for the first time after the war? I say, always trying to get more insight and wanting to know as much as I can about my family. We had heard that Zoli got shot and died, so when he came home in 1948, it was like seeing a ghost. I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe I was dreaming. He was so skinny, but yes, it was our Zoli. He stayed with me after the war, and I always remember the dream he told me he had after he got shot. The dream? He never told me about a dream. I say, my ears perking up. I think that's because when he told a few people about it, they just thought, poor Zoli, he is saying crazy things because of the war. They didn't believe him, so he stopped talking about it. But I knew. I believed him. He told Ergie too, so she knows. You should ask her about it when you go back to California. Can you tell me about the dream, Elinini? Of course, she says. Zoli told me that when he got shot, he was on the ground in a pool of blood. He couldn't feel his hands, and he was cold all over. He passed out and then woke up in a field full of the most beautiful flowers. The weather was beautiful, the sun was shining, and the meadow went on forever, farther than the eye could see. He experienced the most peaceful feeling he ever had. He stood up and just kept walking in this meadow of beautiful flowers and birds. He said that every color had a magnificent brightness, like nothing he'd ever witnessed before. He said even the birds had a brightness and glow that was beyond beautiful. And then from behind him, he heard his sister Ergie. Zoli, please come back. I need you, she said. It was that voice full of love which made him come back. The next thing he knew, he was awake. He was in so much pain, and he was angry that he was not in that field anymore. And then there were other parts of the story. But what was interesting about that story was he never shared that with me, because when people are different and when people know things that they don't know, instead of going, wow, they go, you must be crazy, because it's too hard a lot of times to fathom that. And that's what we're all learning. How do we learn to just listen? And that helps our body heal. And so my dad never shared that story with me because he didn't know I would understand, but he knew. And he also knew that they didn't know. And so that light that he had was the light that actually, the energy light, some people call it God light, some people call it good blood God light, that's what I do. Other people call it divine presence, but in that light, that's where the miracles live. So he had the bullets taken out without medicine and he didn't scream. His brain was able to somehow anesthetize him and allow it. And I would ask him, how come you didn't scream? And he would say, well, then they would take me out of my misery. So he knew. But he stayed in the light, and that light is what allowed him to let go and surrender. And I would ask him, weren't you afraid of dying? Weren't you afraid of losing your arm because you had a gangrene arm? He also developed a gangrene arm. There was no medicine, there was no humane condition, and yet he healed. And he said, I always focused on what I could do. I couldn't focus on anything I couldn't do. And so if I lived, I lived. If I died, I died. But I focused every energy of what I could do, because if I had an ounce of energy on what I couldn't stand, I would have died. And one of the premises of good blood, which is also important in our whole healing in everyday life, is what do we focus on? If we focus on what we hate, our bodies produce the chemicals that support it. It creates inflammation, adrenaline, cortisol, whatever, from the science perspective. If we focus on what we can do, the brain, the neurotransmitters, the chemicals support that. And what we focus on makes a huge difference. So I'd like to share a story of when right before I turned 22 and right before I started teaching, I was a counselor for a group of 15 and 16-year-olds, and we went across Canada camping. And it was really fun. And we went by bus. And the bus driver was great. And we were in British Columbia on these narrow roads. And all of a sudden, the bus driver lost control. And there were cliffs over the narrow roads. He lost control. The bus veered. The tires went into the ground. And the bus was like this. So we could have tipped over easily. And the first thing I saw was the bus driver's foot shaking uncontrollably. That's a physiological response. But he was so calm, and he said, everybody has to stay calm. And the counselor beside me started to panic. And I heard a voice again that said, you're too young to die. And we're like the stewards of the plane. And if they look at us and they freak out, if we freak out, they'll freak out. You have to be calm. And I accessed that wisdom. And one by one, people went out the window like the Poseidon Adventure. And we got out. And the police came, and they couldn't believe the bus didn't fall over. And what was interesting is that wisdom space, that light, whatever you want to call it, took over, and I channeled it. But when I got out and everything was safe, then I started to freak out. And so the fear is there, but we don't let it rule. Right. And then my hands started shaking uncontrollably because I'd experienced that, but we were guided. And my dad was guided through the whole time from that space. So he shared a story that actually just blew me away. And he loved chess, and he taught me how to play chess before I learned how to play checkers. And he said one day it was so cold in Russia that he knew that if they went out to work, because they'd have them do menial work just because. There was no reason, no rhyme or reason, but it was a just because, that they would die because it was so cold. They didn't have warm clothes. They didn't have much food. They didn't have anything of anything. And he said, he told the Russian officer, and the Russians played chess to pass time, and they made pieces from wood or whatever. And the lead historian of Russian POW camps and Hungarian camps who I visited in Budapest, who was a professor there, shared that that's how they made the chess players. And my dad said, I'll play you a game of chess and I'll beat you in 10 moves, in 10 or less than 10 moves. And he said, and if I beat you, we all stay inside today. If you beat me, you kill me. And he figured he had nothing to lose. Mm-hmm. And he played the game of chess and he won. And then he played a second game because he wouldn't let him go. And he played a third game, and after 3 winning games, he said, the Russian officer said, you can stay inside. Now the question I have, I'm in the healthcare field, when I get tired and exhausted, I can't think. When I have a fever, I can't maneuver, and there's very little food or no food, and you can't even call it food, and there was a famine to begin with, so they got morsels. How did he have the wisdom to access that wisdom to win? It's that zone space if you're an athlete. It's the flow space if you're, I think it's called if you're a musician. But it's that space where we just know, and that space we access, which allows us to know, and that's beyond our thoughts. And so I was always curious about how my dad was be able to stay kind and not have hatred in his heart. And so one day, because he asked me a question I didn't want to deal with, it was about him and it was about living and dying, and I wasn't in a place to even think about it because he was healthy. So I changed the subject, and I thought that was smart, and I asked him a question. And the question I asked him was, now if I can find it, that would be good. I go, my dad said to me, Iritka, and Iritka is a term of endearment in Hungarian, so it's like Bob, Bobby, Elizabeth, Lizzie, whatever. Yeah. And so Iritka, there's always something good that can come from bad. Positivity is like a plant that we need to keep watering. It starts as a seed, and we have to water it every day. One day it turns into a flower, and then it just keeps growing. The problem is people always stop watering and nourishing their plant. They give up too quickly. In everything, there's a positive. Yes, I think to myself, focus on the positive and don't worry about things you don't have control over. And then I think to myself, easier said than done. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes people 100 years to understand. What do you mean by that, I asked. Eureka, everything is interconnected. What happens now can affect future generations. One day you will understand. And he always said, one day you'll understand. And I always really got mad at him because I go, just tell me now. Well, one day you'll understand. And he was actually right. And so I asked him this question, how was the war positive? It was a situation where there was horrific beyond horrific. And every day, every second of every day for almost 9 years, he had to live in that. And yet because of the light he had when he died and came back, he focused on that. And that helped him. Call it the zone, space, and sports, call it divine presence. It's beyond religion. It's something universal that we can all access. And so when I asked him, how is the war positive? Every day I focused on how I could help the other prisoners. I knew as long as I could help others, I would be okay. Whenever I could comfort someone or help someone when they were sick, I felt better. I knew I had a purpose. And whenever I was able to, I would give a little to myself, to others, even if it was just through words of hope. I also thought of Ergie and her smile every day. That is what helped me survive. There was always something positive to think of and do in bad circumstances. We just have to look for it. We have to keep looking and never stop. There's so much we have no control over, but we can make a difference through how we react to the things around us, the people around us. And my dad was a plumber in Montreal, and he lived his life with kindness. And my mom's lineage had a lot of worry in it, and he had worry too and fear, but he focused on what he could do, even though the fear was there. And it's so hard. And I've been injured a lot, and I've lived in chronic pain, and I've healed thanks to good blood. But everyone has good blood. It's how we access it and how we get support from the right people, because it takes courage to ask for help. And when we're vulnerable, people think we're soft, but that's when we have courage. And that's what strength is. And as a kid, I used to think my dad was weak because he wouldn't react. And I thought you had to go react. So if something happened, I go, Dad, how come you didn't do anything? And he goes, because you always have to wait until the right moment. And I didn't understand it then. But when we're in a bad space and we're angry and we blame ourselves or we blame others, nothing good ever happens because we're in a stuck space, and it's like a past trauma. And I'll give an example of a past trauma that affects us. Since I've been in so many car accidents, and it's my way of learning, and I've always been protected. I just didn't know it because in physical therapy school, that path led me to the path I had to be on with regards to healing, because the craniosacral, osteopathic, energy work, trauma healing, all that was part of my path, and then help others. And I also had to write a book. That was part of the path and the plan. And it wasn't going to be about my dad. He was going to be a main character, and he knew that. But he didn't tell me that. He just said I would heal, and I would also write about myself healing. And so when we get traumatized by stuff, things happen, and we think back to the past. So I was living in San Francisco, and I was driving with a friend of mine was driving, and all of a sudden she was on a street in San Francisco, and it's like she veered to the right, and I thought she was going to hit a car. I closed my eyes. I heard metal on metal. My neck like whiplashed, and I had pain. And I go, oh my God, I'm reliving the past. I opened my eyes. She never hit the car. The trauma, we call it PTSD, got activated. I heard metal on metal. We all do. My neck relived the memory. I had to get treatment. And that's how powerful trauma is. When people go to war, they say PTSD, but we all have a form of that. And if we don't heal it, we repeat it.
Right.
And a lot of chronic pain, it's like the trauma's living in us, so we have to get support to heal and get a team of healers who believe it's possible. Now, believing possible doesn't mean false hope. False hope means we don't believe it's possible and it's our opinion, or it's someone told us. But believing in the possibility is what I grew up with, because my parents, both my mom and dad, constantly survived the impossible. And I'm going to show a picture of my dad. This picture of my dad, this is 11 and a half months after he came from 9 years in a POW camp. And I couldn't believe the peace within him, the kindness within him. He had no hatred because he didn't focus on that. He focused on letting go, but he had that light and the focus on love. And I'll share about my Aunt Ellie, who talked about forgiveness. But here's another picture when he's older, and he still has that kindness. And my mom, who loved cooking and loved baking, and that's in the book a lot, and that's where she had love. She also had trauma there. But why I'm sharing this piece also is because around this time, it was Passover and the Jewish holiday, and it was the eve of Passover, and my relatives from New York were in town. And my dad came home. We were about to start the Seder. We weren't really religious at all. It was a nice ritual, because Passover, you had flowers, you had presents, you had wine, you had amazing food, and you had singing. So it's a celebration.
Yep.
And he came home white as a ghost. And I go, Dad, what happened? And he said he was going to the garage where his car was repaired. He walked across the street, and all of a sudden he noticed a car going 35 miles an hour and didn't see him. And he jumped onto the hood of the car, and the car, because it was going so fast, did not stop. It had to keep going. And then he got off the car when it stopped, and he said he was okay. I said, but Dad, people have shock. They could die from shock. I was the one who was freaked out. How did he do that? And that's the space we access where we call it miracles. He just knew. It was that light. It was that space that allowed him to do it without him thinking.
Right.
It's beyond thinking. And that's what we can all access for our own inner healing. And we're living in a world where we're consumed by so many things that are not conducive to our own health. And when we get angry and we hate, the hatred goes inside of us. So my Aunt Ellie, who was 88 when I met her, she had survived Auschwitz. She had survived the concentration camp of Auschwitz. And she and her daughters survived it. And here's a picture of me with ice cream, because after communism came down, ice cream was a treat. And we paid for their dinner, but they wanted a treat. And they wanted to have ice cream and treat us to ice cream. And it was like a week's salary. But they were so proud. And my Aunt Ellie was the most beautiful, kind-hearted person I met. And when they started talking about the war, because they shared for the first time ever their experiences, because they vowed never to speak about it. And because I was writing a book for my dad, they had a bigger purpose. And we always have to remember there is a bigger purpose. But when we're in fear, we give up. And when we're in fear, we contract. And it affects our own inner healing in our own families, in our own personal life. And the give up is just the fear taking over. The voices that tell us we can't. We have those voices that tell us we can't, and we have those voices that tell us we can. Which one do we want to choose? Unfortunately, a lot of times we get magnetized to the dark. But if we can remember it, we can ask for support to get out of it. Whether it's healing the body, healing the heart, healing the mind, it's equally important to get support. That's courage. And so I asked my great aunt, what two things are important in life? And she said, the two most important things are, and I'll just read what she said. Ellie Nenny, and this is in my book, and you'll all get to meet Ellie Nenny if you choose to read Good Blood, A Journey of Healing, second edition. Ellie Nenny looks out the window and then looks at me. She smiles. The first and most important thing is the greatest gift of life is the gift of love. That is what makes me want to get up every day. People like you, my family, my friends, Erika, the Nazis, they didn't understand anything. Their hearts they could not feel, or they wouldn't have done what they did. Love, they had no idea. No one who did what they could did. No one who did what they did could. And so they knew nothing about love. But how do you, Erika, Ellie Nenny cuts me off. I forgave the Nazis because I knew they knew nothing about love, life, and about what's important. And my mouth opened up, and then she continued, and she said, I had to let go of the hatred. I wasn't going to let their hatred of people who knew nothing about life and about love be inside my heart. I had to let go and create a clean slate of love, but it didn't mean I'd forget. Forgetting, you never forget. You just don't want to bring their hatred in your heart. And we live in life where it's more empowering, even in our families' interactions, it's more empowering to get angry than to feel hopeless or helpless or whatever's inside of us. But what is it we want for ourselves? And this affects our physical body. In the United States, there's more chronic pain than anywhere else.
Yeah.
And people are getting sicker and sicker, and they want to be fixed, but you have to heal. And it's you. If you have blaming yourself or blaming others, you never heal. So I'm a master at blaming myself. I used to go, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, oh my God, and then I can't get rid of that thought. Or there's others who blame others, and it's so much easier than to feel. And the truth is that what we radiate is what the world sees. So if we blame ourselves and we're like this, that's what they see. If we blame others, it's like torpedoes hitting, and that's what we feel. And so what we choose to do, what do we want to choose in our lives? Do we want to choose to have self-love and kindness, or do we want to choose to hate? Because if we can't get rid of hatred, we're putting hate in our hearts and making that the important piece. And nothing survives with love, without love. It was Buddha who said, hatred does not cease with hatred, only with love. So another miracle story is on my cover of my book, and it's the gold chain. And this gold chain was given to my mom when they went into hiding. They were hiding in the woods for 6 months, and her father gave her the gold chain that they put in the shoe. And then a Christian family hid them in the floorboards, and it was humans being humans. Although the threat was if they got caught, they would all die, they were humans being humans. And what was interesting is the gold chain was the most important possession my mom had that I knew, and that it was a Jewish person who told on them. And what it taught me was it's not about religion that matters, it's about kindness in your heart that matters. And it's about humans being humans. And what are we doing today? When we have judgment on someone else, it's because we feel bad about something and we don't let them have their own perspective. And so when we go to a restaurant, imagine if all we want to do is eat the same food. And so back to the story of the gold chain, they went to 3 concentration camps. One was the Bergen-Belsen death camp. And in all the camps, they never took her shoe. They took everything else from you. They took everything from you to dehumanize you and have nothing that you can relate to. But in all the camps, they never took her shoe that had the gold chain. And a person who survived the same camp as my mom read the book and said the biggest miracle of the book was they never took her shoe. The person who survived Auschwitz said the biggest miracle of the book was they never took her shoe that had the gold chain. And when the war ended, she put it on her. And it was her most important possession. And when I was writing the book, I wanted to know why it was her most important possession. And so I asked my niece to ask her, because I figured if I asked her, she wouldn't answer. If she asked her, she would. And so when Michelle asked her, my mom said, Erie put you up to this, didn't she? And we all laughed. And she says, no, I wanted to know. And she said the greatest miracle was that gold chain. And it reminded her of healing and her dad's love. And so my mom passed when she was 94, but right before she passed, she asked me to have the gold chain. And so when she passed, I was in Montreal and I live in San Francisco area. And I put it on and I thought to myself, and I even said it out loud, you've got to put it on or you'll lose it. So I put on the gold chain and I went back home the next day and the gold chain wasn't there. Or I just remembered the next day the gold chain wasn't there. So when I put it on and then I went home, at home the gold chain wasn't there and I never checked it before that. So it was within 24 hours. I was devastated, distraught, everything you could imagine. It lasted through the war, through the camps, through Israel, Canada, where when I moved, when I was 3 years old. And she had it until she was 94 years old. And after 3 days, I had to surrender. And that's part of what good blood is. Because when we can't let go of wanting something, our bodies tighten up like that and we can't expand and go to what we need. We focus on what we want and we can't go to what we need. And the divine plan is what we need, not what we want. And it's way bigger than anything we could want. And so I finally surrendered and I said, God, if you want me to have the gold chain and put it in the book on the cover, you got to find it. And every day I said that, but I let go of ever retrieving it. And that's an energy field that opens up. So when we have love, that's the energy field. When we have kindness, that's the energy field. When we have hatred, that's the energy field. So my mom's neighbor in Montreal, after 3 weeks of this, says to her mom, and they were neighbors and they really loved my mom, I wonder where the gold chain can be. And you know, when we ask the question, I wonder, instead of I can't, different doors open up. And then Muriel, who asked her mom that question, said, I wonder if it's in I gave them this beautiful floor runner to remind, a rug that reminds them of my mom. And she checked the rug, and she was a jeweler, so she was fine combing it. It wasn't there. But she remembered the same day she got the rug, a person who helped my mom at the end of her life, Julie, got a rug too, because she was so good to my mom and my mom loved her. And so we gave her a carpet runner. And so she called her at 8 o'clock at night. And she said, you know, my husband, I kept telling him to bring it to the cleaners. It's 3 weeks and he still hasn't brought it to the cleaners. Let me check, it's still rolled up. The gold chain was there. And then when I came to Montreal and she gave it to me, I knew it would be in the cover of the book and I knew I'd never wear it again because it wasn't for me to wear. And this is what happens when we believe it's possible. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. But when we don't think it's going to happen, we're always going to go on, we can't. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about faith, that's part of good blood too. And my grandmother, who was my mom's mom, she went in the camps with the mom. And my mom, I knew 3 things about the war. One was that the gold chain. The other one was that somebody told on them. And it was a Jew, which reminded me to be kind to everybody. So it was a really powerful learning for me. It had nothing to do with religion, race, orientation, anything. It's what's inside the heart. And that's what my dad taught me. And she found the light in the camps too. In the most horrific of times, she came from a very wealthy family. They were a very wealthy Jewish family. But she had to be very passive because that was their role. And if things happened, like my mom, who was very precocious and filled with light, her father was scared, and so he would put her down, and there was nothing she could do. Yet in the camps, she found the love, the light, the same light my dad had in different ways. And I asked my mom, what made you survive? And the interesting part was that my grandmother just was filled with light, and that helped my mom. And so I asked my mom, what made you survive? And she said, every night your bubby, and this is what we called her, her mother, my bubby, she held me close and told me, tomorrow we'll be liberated. And she would say, tomorrow we'll be liberated. She never let go of the faith. And that faith was open to the possibility. She focused on the light the whole time and the love she had for my mom. So in many ways, they saved each other, because my mom actually saved my grandmother, because in the camp sometimes they made people do menial stuff just to do menial stuff. There was no purpose or anything to it. And they didn't ask my grandmother to, and my mom noticed that the older people weren't called on. And she made my grandmother go, and my grandmother says, no, I don't need to go. And she went anyway. And that night, the older people weren't there anymore. And so they saved each other. But the love that my grandmother had, and then I would go visit her every Sunday for lunch, and she had kindness and self-love and acceptance of other people. She had no hate in her heart. And that's what we have to learn to do. We have to learn to heal the hate we have. Because when we hate others, we hate ourselves. And we can't heal without that. And the whole book goes 2 continents and 4 generations. It's my years of teaching and how different people influenced me. And then there was a chapter where I was fortunate enough to swim in the middle of the ocean with dolphins of the wild. The dolphin found me and we played. That was like a miracle, because I needed healing, and the dolphin knew. And then there's the chapters where I went to Košice, Prague, and my relatives spoke for the first time about the war, because it was for a bigger purpose. But they focused on how they survived, how were they able to heal, and how they could believe in the good of man. And some of the people who shared the story shared how some of the Germans were actually helping them. And there was one in particular, when she came off the trains, she told me, I asked her how she survived, and she said the German gave her a beret and put it in her hair, but she could feel his kindness without words. And he knew that their head would get shaved and she wouldn't need it and have any purpose, but she can feel the kindness. And that reminded her that kindness existed. So she focused on that kindness the whole time, that light, not the terror. And her mother, my great aunt Ellie, she filled her daughters with love. And that's what they could focus on. And they learned it their way, but we all have that in us. Trauma is trauma. It fills a room. And it shows up in our bodies, and our bodies are always guiding us. We think it's punishing us, but we have to learn to listen to our bodies, to listen to what it's telling us. And we need support for that. And if we have hatred, we have to get curious. What is causing me to be so angry at myself or angry at others? What is causing me not to be able to let go of it? I'm so good at not letting go of stuff, but I'm also really good to ask for help and have the intention, even though it could take 5 to 10 years or longer. But I have that intention of, I want to have that inner peace in me. I want to have that self-love, and I want to have kindness, because kindness is so important. And it's so important we don't recognize it. So I want to leave you with, what is it that you want for yourselves? And I would be honored to have you read the book. You can get it at MSI Press or Amazon, or at this library, Simsbury Library, and allow yourself the gift of tapping into your own good blood and allowing you to actually access the precious human life we're on and the gifts we have. And so with that, I want to say thank you.
For over 40 years, SCM
has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education,
and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SEM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government
come together.